It's my pleasure to welcome you all here again. I'm sort of a little bit unsure about what to say about the title. I'll come to that in a minute. I'm sort of actually a bit embarrassed that it's a boy that's introducing it. I'll come to that in a minute too. But let's just start with Sue herself. Sue from Queensland via Hong Kong to Monash. Let me tell you a couple of things that I think are really important. Sue has come to us with great experience in early years and clearly a very strongly, highly regarded international researcher in early years education. Impact in Monash and the Faculty of Education, sensational. In the last year or so, I would describe Sue as hitting her straps in the faculty. She's got the hang of the place. She understands what goes on, if that's ever possible. She's got the hang of what goes on, and now she's actually pushing the right buttons for us to do what we see is really important in the faculty, and that is build our scholarship, make sure that the ideas that we're producing actually get out in the world for critique, and that she pushes the ideas of mentoring, development and support for early career researchers. So you can tell from what I'm saying, it's a pleasure to have Sue here. She has made an impact in the short time she's been here, and I expect much more of it for much longer. No pressure. And now the topic. Well, it's a bit hard for me to introduce this topic because she hasn't shown me the overheads and she's purposely kept me in the dark about what's going on here. And in a faculty that's dominated by women, it's actually hard for me to think about what does this really mean. So this is going to be genuinely an open question tonight about what does it mean. I'm hoping it reflects more on the system than on the faculty or Monash itself, but we'll wait to see. And as is Sue's wont, she will let these things come out in her time, in her way, at her leisure, and that's a good thing. So Sue, welcome tonight. Thank you very much. Here we go.
Thanks, John, for that lovely introduction. Of course, I schooled you up before. Not really. Hello everyone, and a warm welcome on a cold night. Thank you so much for coming, and it's great to see so many familiar faces in the audience. I'm looking forward to this presentation, and I'm expecting you to pay close attention, John. So, women in the Professoriate and the Boys Club in Australian universities. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, the Kulin land, the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and I'd also like to acknowledge that this has always been a place of learning. I'd like to acknowledge that the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who contribute to Monash University, who we might have contact with in our everyday lives, and the contribution that they make to Australian society as a whole. And the next acknowledgement goes to my co-author, Professor Carmel Diesman. We first started working on this topic in 2008. We were awarded a grant by what's called Universities Australia now, but it was then called the Australian Vice Chancellors something or other committee, AVCC. So we had this grant to investigate understanding the achievements and aspirations of new women professors. And it was in that time when the Australian government and the government departments were playing around with the idea of a research assessment exercise. So there was a lot of concern at that time about what might happen if there was a research assessment exercise in Australia. There were trials done, and I was involved in a trial at QUT when I was working there. So this began then. We gave our report in 2009. We collected data in 2008, and we have continued to collect data, the last of which was collected in 2013. So it's had a long life, but this was its initial beginnings. So just a bit of an overview of what I'm going to talk about. the international context and then the Australian context. And then I'll give some information about the research project. Then I'm going to talk about catalysts for and inhibitors of academic career success. Then I'll describe 5 career profiles that we've identified from the research data that we've collected, say some things about the Boys Club, and then conclude. Okay, so starting off with the international context. The European Union has collected a lot of detailed information across the member countries of the European Union every 3 years since 2003. So the 2015 report was called by the European Commission, it was called She Figures 2015, Gender in Research and Innovation. So the data is not all from 2015, it spans 2012, 13 and 14, and the report was produced in 2015. So here's some of the information drawn from the 28 member countries of the European Union. So women make up 47% of the PhD graduates. Men are more than twice as likely as women to choose engineering, manufacturing or construction. Women make up 28% of the PhD graduates in those same areas. And women are twice as likely to choose education as men. In higher education, women are more likely to work than men, to work part-time and or have what's called precarious contractual arrangements. So in 2012, 13.5% of women were working part-time in research and 8.5% of men were. There were 10.8% of women who had precarious contracts, and that means a contract of 1 year or less or no contract at all, and men 7.3%. So in 2012 in the European Union, women made up nearly 60% of the graduates, undergraduates that is. And in the higher education sector, their categories or levels of staff are in A, B and C, and A is the highest, and you can see that as the grades go from C to B to A, the percentage of women reduces, similar to Australia. So if we look at engineering and science, the same happens until we're down to about 13% of grade A women who are teaching in science and engineering. The highest proportions of women grade A staff are in humanities, with 30%, and social sciences, 23.5%. The lowest are in engineering and technology, don't even make 10%. So in the 28 member countries, women lead 15% of the institutions that deliver PhDs, and that's risen from 10% in 2010. So things are improving. We know that males have a greater success in funding applications for the national programs in their member countries, 31.8%. Women's achievements are just over 27%. So women are underrepresented in research and innovation outputs, and innovation is more severely affected. So the patents that are registered to women are quite low compared with men, nearly 9%. So the men, or the males, have the rest of the patents. So between 2011 and 2013, 31% of the publications had a female corresponding author. So the corresponding author is the person who gets named on the published article as corresponding author. That's what that means. So we know from this information that female and male corresponding authors publish in comparably influential journals. And we also know that even though women corresponding authors account for fewer scientific publications than men, they publish in journals of equivalent prestige or similar impact factor. So if we move to the US now, this information comes from the American Association of University Professors from 2013. They do regular surveys, and this survey of percentages is drawn from 1,142 reporting institutions in the USA. So you can see the ranks there and the percentages of female and males at professors, associate professor and assistant professors. So they have a slightly different system from here, and you can see that there are more than 3 times as many male professors as there are female professors. The associate professors, considerably more. Not so much difference in some of the others, but when you look at the overall figures, there's quite a big difference in percentages of employed males and employed females. So Weston Curtis did some work in 2006 and said they claimed that there were 4 gender indicators that they could use for the US data. And that was the employment status, whether it was full-time or part-time, the tenure status, so whether people were tenured or contract staff, and how far through their tenure track they were. The tenure track is usually about 7 years, although it does vary with some universities. They also looked at the average salary. The salaries have varied widely across the US for the same ranks, and the American Association of University Professors has been tracking that for some time. And they also say that another gender indicator, if you remember from the last slide, the proportion of professors male opposed to female, is an indicator of gender as well. So there have been ideas put forward in the US about lack of gender parity in the Professoriate being the lack of women in the pipeline. But Munro and Chu did an analysis of the data from the American Association of University Professors, and they said the pipeline argument doesn't work because it explains inequality as insufficient numbers rather than a result of ongoing discrimination that requires remedies. So when they aggregated the data, they suggested there was a disparity which represented a problem of advancement, not an absence of candidates. So if we come to some Australian context now, but set initially in a global context. And sorry for the amount of information that's on this slide, but the first university that we know of was established in 700 BC in India. The first European one was in the University of Bologna. The first English-speaking one was in Oxford. The first woman to become a professor was a professor of mathematics at the University of Padua, and we're still in the 1600s. In 1850, Australia's first university was established, the University of Sydney, then Melbourne in 1854, and at that time there was a thing called a boys' club happening, and it was a club that provided organised activities for boys because mostly men attended universities in those days. Mostly men. So in 1883, the first woman graduated from the University of Melbourne. Then in 1911, the University of Queensland was established, and it enrolled males and females from its initial opening of the doors, which was quite different from the other universities because they had only enrolled males to start with. So in 1965, Joyce Ackroyd was the first woman to enter the Professoriate, and that was at the University of Queensland. Then Leonie Kramer in the University of Sydney. Then Roma Mitchell was the first Deputy Vice-Chancellor in 1972 at the University of Adelaide, and she became the first female Chancellor in 1983. And then the first female Vice-Chancellor was Diane Yerbury at Macquarie University in 1987. So there you have a bit of a potted history of when universities began up to the contribution of significant women in Australian universities. And of course there are many other significant women who are making a contribution to universities in Australia throughout the world, in Australia and throughout the world. So if we have a look at the Vice-Chancellors in Australian universities, in 2016 there are 29 male Vice-Chancellors and 9 female Vice-Chancellors. Now I have used the Universities Australia website, and they list 38 universities. So there are some institutions that see themselves as universities, but they're not listed on the Universities Australia website. Some of them are counted in the ERA assessment, but I have used the Universities Australia website. So you can see the percentages there for the female and the male Vice-Chancellors currently. Looking at the female academics in Australian universities, these figures are from 2015 from the Department of Education and Training. So 69% of males above senior lecturer and 31% of females above senior lecturer. And senior lecturer or below, 56% males and 44% females. So as the ranks go higher, the proportion of women reduces. Now you're going to have to look a bit carefully at this slide, and sorry for the amount of data on it again, but the things that I want to draw your attention to are the figures from 2010 to 2014, but also professional staff are included on here, as well as academic staff. So I might go to the bottom line. Senior academic staff at level E and above. In 2010 there were 23%, just over, and in 2014 we're on a quarter, 25%. So there's been a steady rise in the last 4 or so years, senior academic staff at level E and above. And I'll just let you look at those figures for a moment. I hope you can see them. Are they clear? Yep. Okay, good. I also think the senior professional staff is some interesting figures for us to think about at the moment as well for those people who work in universities. And that was sourced as well from the Universities Australia website. So on to the research. So this is the research design. Phase 1 was a survey. It was an electronic survey. We approached the HR departments of 33 universities in Australia, and no, we approached more than that, but 33 universities in Australia agreed that their staff could be sent electronic copies of the survey through the HR departments. And we had 520 responses to those electronic surveys. There were 255 women who responded and 240 males who responded, and intriguingly enough, there were 25 non-responses for gender. So we thought that was quite interesting given what the survey was about. We did some descriptive and inferential statistics and some thematic analyses based on what the information was that we got from the surveys. Phase 2, when people finished the survey, they could opt into a focus group interview selection if they wanted to, completely dissociated from their survey responses. So we went ahead and contacted 21 people who responded favourably. In fact, we contacted more, but we ended up interviewing focus group we had a number of different focus groups, and we talked to 21 people who had completed the survey and then engaged in the focus group interview. So phase 3, we used the survey data and the focus group data to make career profiles of new women professors. Phase 4, we went back in 2012 and 2013 and interviewed another 8 people who were part of the 21 people who were on the focus group interviews. We contacted them again and they were willing to engage in further interview. And then phase 5, we've identified some career case profiles of women professors based on the survey, the focus group data, and then the more recent interviews in 2012 and 2013. So I'm going to share some data with you about catalysts for and inhibitors of academic women's career success. So you can see the catalysts on the left-hand side of your screen, and I'm going to talk particularly about the things in purple: mentoring for success and luck. And then inhibitors, I'll talk about negative discrimination and the boys' club and lack of confidence. Before I move on though, I just wanted to make a note about the equal employment opportunities which many universities in Australia have had for many years, some 30 years, but generally speaking they haven't achieved the desired improvement in the percentage of women in the Professoriate that were originally imagined. So the change has been more challenging and much slower than originally people might have thought. So there are some things to think about in regard to some of those policies and initiatives that have been undertaken, but I'm not going to spend any more time on those. Okay, so mentoring for success. This was a recurrent theme in the data from both the female and the male respondents. And by the male respondents, I mean the respondents to the surveys. So people who were important mentors were doctoral supervisors, heads of department, deans, international colleagues, formal and informal mentors who were both inside and outside universities. The mentors were both male and female. The women in particular were highly, highly committed to mentoring more junior staff and to other women so that they could succeed. And that mentoring was talking mostly about opportunities and making sure that the women knew about the academic culture and how it worked. So 2 examples. One was from a focus group interview participant. She said, "I do a lot of mentoring. We actively go and seek people to do joint research projects. So we're constantly going and asking people if they want to join our team or do they want to come in as an investigator on my ARC, because we always have an ECR. I'm actually pretty good at doing that because I didn't have that myself. I'm keen to make sure that the women I work with at least get that opportunity." Another one from the focus group interview said, "I find I say to people, 'Are you applying for that job?' Like last night I rang somebody and said, 'There's a job in another part of the university for senior lecturer.' And I said, 'Well, you're a lecturer, why don't you go for it?' I'm also very much on the trail of people participating in awards or for awards. Like we have VC awards or teaching awards, and I'll help people apply." So very active sorts of mentoring, engaged, hands-on sorts of things, very supportive. So some information about the gender of the new professors and the mentors. So the new women professors identified in the survey were mentored by female and male academics, but the ratio was 53 to female to male. The ratio of female and male mentors for the new women professors was 11 to 9. So there were many more male mentors that people reported on in the survey data than female mentors. So males had a substantially higher proportion of female mentors compared with the females, and we surmise from that a higher proportion of males are potentially privy to powerful male mentoring influences. How it happens in the academy, what you can do, how you can do it, I'll talk up for you, that kind of stuff. So from the literature, my own promoter has always supported me when I asked him to, but he never supported my career on his own initiative as far as I know, and nominated me for things. Never, never. It's not something he usually does, but I know he's done it for some men around him. Actually, he's never understood that I've just as much ambition in this area as men have. He doesn't realise that all this is as important for me as it is for my male colleagues. He once told me this honestly, that the penny hadn't dropped. That's from a study in the Netherlands. So I think that's probably applicable to some of the females who had male mentors in our survey, but we don't know that for sure. So moving on to luck. So these women talked about luck, chance, opportunity, serendipity, being in the right place at the right time as being instrumental in their success. They did not name traditional success factors such as, oh well, you know, I got 10 ARC grants in 10 years. They did not talk about their publication records and how outstanding they were. They did not talk about the awards that they'd got. They did not talk about their expertise and abilities as reasons for being promoted. It was attributed to things like, oh, well, I just happened to be there at the right time. That kind of stuff. So we found this quite puzzling, and we were thinking about how risky this must be for women to talk about these sorts of things. And we think that there must be some powerful restraints on what these women think they can say or what they're prepared to say. So excusing their success and crediting it to chance is still puzzling for us. So here are some examples of what they said. I think the biggest opportunity was being asked to be acting head of school for a year and to have the mentoring of the previous head of school who was still around, and that was a great opportunity. I'd gone to the UK to do the usual travelling thing, and it was only by chance that I was working at a place, only by chance, where they were establishing a stroke research unit. I was encouraged to apply for that position and do my PhD alongside it. I had no intention of going along this career path when I graduated from university. And the last one, these were all from, one was from a focus group interview and two were from the follow-up individual interviews later. There's a fair amount of serendipity involved. So I think you need to be able to take advantage of things that have come up and perhaps take a risk. You can never plan out exactly how things will pan out, but if opportunities come up, be prepared to take a chance with them. So none of the people we talked to in the interviews had ever planned that they would be a professor. It was, well, I started and I was going along quite well, and someone said, why don't you apply for senior lecturer when I was a lecturer? So I did that and I got it, and I just, did this and I did that, and then someone said, why didn't you apply for associate professor? And that's how it happened. None of them talked about having a plan or a goal of being a professor. It just kind of happened. I see nods and smiles. So I'm going to talk now for a little bit about career profiles, make some comments about being appointed to the Professoriate, and talk about career profiles in terms of academic life course, so progression, when you do doctoral studies, and family stuff. So the top picture here is Gayatri Spivak, who we have used from some of the data, for some of the data analysis that we're doing, but I'm not going to talk about that analysis tonight. So Gayatri's an Indian woman, but has been working at universities in the US for some time. The person in the middle is Judith Butler. We've also drawn on some of her work for our analysis of the data. Again, I'm not going to talk about that analysis tonight. And the person down the bottom is Valerie Walkerdine, who's from Judith Butler's from the US, and Valerie Walker-Dean is from the UK. And Valerie Walker-Dean is one of my heroes because she was the first person that I read after Erica Berman's work, which critiqued early childhood education and what was happening in early childhood education. So she's been a friend of mine since probably about 1986 or 87. Not that I know her, I just think of her as a friend through her writing. Okay, so here's a couple of graphs. Frequency on the left, age appointed as professor on the bottom of the graph. The top one's males, the bottom one's female. So these were all survey respondents. They were all aged between 26 and 66 years. The mean age of appointment across both the genders was 47.85. 45% of respondents were aged between 41 and 50, and 39% were aged between 51 and 60. There were 2 female outliers. You can see them there on the bottom graph, and they were aged 26 years. And they were appointed, I think they were both appointed as associate professors at that age, from memory. So we were able to do a gender comparison based on the age at appointment, and it was statistically significant at 0.05 between the mean age of appointment for females and males. So on average, females were appointed at years 48.33, just over 48 years of age, and males were appointed at 46, nearly 46 and a half years of age. So there was a difference of 1.85 years in the mean age of appointment between the males and the females. So I just want you to hang on to the 1.85 years for what's coming next. So some potential implications for women being appointed even only 1.85 years later. Some of the things that we could think about are it could contribute to the lower portion of females in the professoriate. Yes. We're speculating here. If both retired at the same age, males and females, for example 65, we know that women would spend less time in the professoriate. But we know from the ABS data that women retire on average from all professions in Australia aged 60.4 years. Men retire at 62.6 years. So if we use the mean age of entry to the professoriate and the mean retirement age, the male estimated career length in the professoriate is 16.1 years, just over 16 years, and for females it's just over 12 years. So there's a difference of 4 years between males and females potentially spending that much less time in the professoriate if you're a female. So the potential cumulative effect of that is the substantial reduction in the years that women potentially spend in the professoriate. And there's a little diagram that shows that. So we've got the mean male professorial length of time, 16 years. Mean age of entry, 46 and a half. Retire, 62, just over 62. So if the women are appointed 1.8 years later, the difference, again, I've just said it, that kind of just puts it in a different way, but I needed to tell you that other information first before we got to this. So there's a difference of about 4 years potentially, based on that speculation that we did. So moving on now to career profiles. These are career profiles that we have identified from the survey, from the focus group interviews, and from the individual interviews, and we've drawn on data from each of those. Left-hand side are the career profiles, a continuous career, which we've called a rare career. So across the top, we've got the influence or the timing of the doctorate academic career progression and family responsibilities. So if you're a continuous career person or a rare bird, you might have done your doctorate prior to or early in your academic career. The academic career progression has been steadily upward and there are few or no family responsibilities. If you have a linear career path, which we've called the juggler, you might have completed a doctorate while managing family responsibilities, applicable to quite a few women, including me. Who else in the audience? Thank you, quite a few. So you manage your academic career in tandem with child rearing and childbearing, and family responsibilities, of course, are child rearing, bearing, and often with aged parents as well, depending upon the time of life that you have children. If you have a delayed career, that's what we've called the reinventor, where you might complete a doctorate after having children, then you might have late entry or re-entry to the academy, and yes, family responsibilities including child rearing and bearing. A multiple career, which we've called the professional, varied entry to the academy. Most of these people worked in industry and the academy. Most of them come from industry to the academy, so they have varied family responsibilities as well. Can be none, can be a number of children, can be aged parents as well. A disrupted career, which we've called the follower. There were not a lot, less than 10 of these people. They completed their doctorates at varied amounts of time, but their careers were impacted because they followed their partner's career. So they followed their husband's career, often moving countries and interstate. So here are some quotes from these people. So the rare person, the continuous career, said, "I believe having children was incompatible with my career. I would never have been willing to have a child and put it in daycare at a younger age, and I enjoyed my career too much to give up the several years I would need to meet that." So that was from the survey. That was a female respondent, number 59 from the survey, who said that. The linear career, the juggler, it was my choice to have children, and I don't regret that decision at all. But I think to pursue an academic career and rise to the top is much easier if you don't have children. My husband is also an academic, and I find myself occasionally feeling quite envious of him, as having children has not hampered his career at all. That was a survey respondent. The delayed career person, or the reinventor, said, "It's necessary to think about the combination of studying and child rearing. I did postgraduate study, masters and PhD while having very young children. It was the only viable way of being able to justify not going back to work." I think that's a really interesting statement, but being productive. Then I spent the best part of 2 years working sessionally before getting a full-time academic position, and that's not unusual either. Quite a few of our respondents were in a similar position to that. Multiple careers, or the multiple profiles, or the professional. I only came into academia late in my career after I'd been in industry for quite a long time. I first came to university about 12 years ago. I have 3 kids. The reason I was changing careers was that there was nowhere to go for a female in engineering at that time. So I did a PhD while I was in the academic position, and that's from one of our individual interviews. Disrupted career, the follower of the husband's career. I'm deeply happy that my career has been a rewarding and integral part of my life and growth. Individually, as a partner and parent, and within society, I've moved from senior staff group to level E for a variety of reasons. Some of them are related to gender in respect of career development. I'm also faced with a major sacrifice, as I may have to return to X, an overseas location, to join my husband. Not for the first time for that person, we believe, either. So there's some examples of the 5 career profiles that we've identified from the data, and those examples are illustrative of the 5 profiles. So I've now got the profiles and looked at work or family pressure points for each of those profiles. So for the continuous career or the rare bird, there are no specific pressure points. Some may come though if there are aged family members or ill family members. For the linear career or the juggler, there's pressure to care for children or elderly parents and simultaneously develop careers. So doctoral study is an additional pressure, and sometimes those things happen all at once. For the reinventor, there was pressure to move through the academic levels quickly to reach peak career while managing family responsibilities. So there was a chance that if you didn't do that, you wouldn't reach peak career in the time that you might have had in the academy. You would have run out of time. So that's one of the reasons that merit is supposed to help. But there's stories about merit. So multiple careers or the professional, the pressure points are likely for each transition between jobs that these people have. There's potentially a loss of time to work towards peak career again, but that may be offset by new opportunities. So there is some time crunch that is possible here for these people who have moved from, say, industry to the academy, or some have moved from the academy to industry and back again. And the disrupted career, the pressure for these people is likely at each transition between jobs, and it's quite difficult for those people to maintain career momentum. So getting on to the boys' club. Latter part of the 20th century, if you recall from that table with all those dates on, I talked in 1855 there was organised activities for boys. Well, in the latter part of the 20th century, Australian universities no longer provided those sorts of activities for boys. They hadn't for some time before that. A few women had senior leadership roles, but there was still a scarcity of women professors and women in senior leadership roles. So universities in Australia had or were organisations which favoured men. So they were really embodying the second meaning of the boys' club, which emerged in 1979, if you can believe the Oxford English Dictionary 2013 version. They defined it as an institution or profession dominated by men, especially affluent white men, considered to exclude women. So based on the relatively low proportion of women in the professoriate and the scarcity of women in senior roles, the status quo has improved, but it remains definitely in favour of males in the professoriate. So let me introduce you to benchmark man. This was a term used over 25 years ago by Margaret Thornton, originally in 1990. Margaret Thornton is now a Professor of Law and Public Policy Fellow at the Australian National University in Canberra. So originally she explained in 1990 what she meant by benchmark man. So I'm using a more recent article that she wrote in the Australian Feminist Studies, I think it was. So in her more recent 2013 article, she reiterates what she said in 1990. She maintains that the ideal academic continues to be constituted in the image of benchmark man. This normative masculinist standard favours those who are Anglo-Australian, heterosexual, able-bodied, middle class, not elderly, espouse a right of centre politics, and a nominal mainstream religion, if any. When women and others are measured against benchmark men, they are invariably found wanting. Now, we found a lot of comments made by our participants reflected those ideas. So Benchmark Man was an interesting find, and one of the things that intrigued me was it had been around for such a long time, that Margaret Thornton had originally talked about Benchmark Man in 1990. So here we've got some practices that are associated with the Boys Club in universities. These kinds of things have been reported in the international literature for about the last 2 decades. So things like women having to adopt masculinist traits to be leaders, women having to become honorary men. UK researchers characterised the Boys Club as aggressive, macho, competitive behaviour by male academics. The Boys Club is associated with a hard-nosed management style. White, an Australian researcher, in 2001 used Margaret Thornton's Benchmark Man to describe the dominant male culture where men see themselves as having the criteria for promotion to senior academic positions. And in that context, they see themselves and no one else as having the criteria for promotion to those high academic positions in the context of that research. So some older female academics feel invisible when the Boys Club is in action. Some female academics feel marginalised. Women have been perceived as lightweight. And in the US, Overton suggested that there's more subtle forms of discrimination that continue. Tenured women being marginalised and excluded from significant roles, gender differentials in salary, and that has been shown to be the case by the American Association of University Professors, but also differentials in space and institutional resources that are made available to males and females. So the Dutch researchers again, they say that this is especially so in the medical and the natural sciences. From our data, so I'm moving from the international literature now to our data, the Boys Club wasn't mentioned on the survey or introduced in the interviews, but we did ask about discrimination. In the surveys, the Boys Club was referred to by 73 new professors, 70 female and 3 males, mostly in the sections where there were, spaces for open-ended comments. They were referred to by 4 of 8 individual interviewees, and I'm sorry, I couldn't find how many people mentioned them in the focus group interviews. I know we've got that somewhere, but the data's about this big. So a survey respondent, male number 139, said the Boys Club is definitely in operation at my university. A female said, old Boys Club. Australian men seem particularly dismissive of women. So in other parts of her survey, she'd indicated she had migrated to Australia from the UK, and she found things to be a little bit different. The next one, I couldn't even get leave to study for the PhD, even though male staff around me routinely got several semesters off. I had to resign in the end to do the doctorate. The Boys Club, which provided management positions to the boys and the large unit lecturing responsibilities to the women. Yes, yes, yes. We had quite a few of those comments. And that's reflected in the international literature as well. Here are some more detailed comments from the surveys. So one person who was obviously informed distinguished between the latent discrimination and the open discrimination that she had experienced. So obviously it was a hurtful thing that had stayed with her for some time. She said the head of school was giving greater teaching loads to women lecturers and senior lecturers because they were good at it. In brackets, nurturing. This was sustained over many years, effectively diminishing opportunities for research. That was the latent or closed. Open discrimination, male lecturers telling PhD students that women were better at teaching, but not tough enough to supervise and provide disciplined feedback and support for PhD research. Another survey, female respondent, I was being proposed as head of school. The male academics of the school went on a visit to Chinese universities. The 2 female academics couldn't go because of children responsibilities. The men decided over some beers that it would be better not to have me as head of school. End of story. And that was not the only comment similar to that in the surveys. So now I'm sharing some data from, and I've not got long to go, from the individual interviews about the boys' club. There is this thing of perhaps feeling you're not taken seriously or as seriously as your male colleagues. One of my women colleagues here says, yes, a senior man will pat a woman on the head to say, very well done. Pats her on the head to keep her down. Whereas for a man, it's pats on the back, pack them forward, if you see what I mean. So we've done an analysis of that using Spivak and Butler and Foucault for the book that's coming. Another individual interview participant said, I mean, there's always a certain amount of feeling that you're not being taken seriously as a woman, particularly in science and engineering. I sat in lots of meetings where I tried to put my hand up to make a comment and have been absolutely talked over as if my view as a woman wasn't relevant whatsoever. I tend to make a joke about it now that I'm older and grey-haired. I will sit there and wave my hand about and say, hello, grey-haired old lady here wanting to make a comment. That usually makes them sit back and listen to me. Well, she said, they sit back and give me a chance to say something. Whether anyone listens to me is something else. There were several women heading for promotion to professor, and then all of a sudden a young male was appointed professor at faculty level. And then also another male professor was appointed. Didn't go through the promotion process, and so there was some disruption about that I think the males were much more aggressive in going above the head of school to get promotion when they would appeal to the dean of whatever, don't you love it, the dean of whatever, and I think they still are. So these are the comments, these last 3 are comments from 2013, 12-13 data. This actually comment was made by a person who is employed by a G8 university. So I don't think it happened that long ago. And I know a lot of universities in Australia do have the ability to appoint by invitation at professor and associate professor level, but I think it was the way that this was done that caused the grief. I'm not going to talk about that. So just a couple of challenges to think about, a couple of challenges and thinking points. This is again referring to the researchers from the Netherlands. In our research, the gender equality practices were unable to counter the multitude of gender inequality practices. Their sword was too blunt. There are simply too many heads on the dragon and each requires a specific attack. This explains why it is so often difficult to undo inequality. Simultaneous, multifaceted gender inequality practices. I've lost my place. Where am I? Sorry. Simultaneous, multifaceted, I've got face, gender inequality practices are ineffectively countered by gender equality practices because those lack teeth, especially in traditional masculine academic environments with thick, ponderous traditions and values. That means if there's a boys' club operating, then the success is very limited, marginal, some progress, not a lot. Difficult to undo inequality. Difficult to undo inequality. The dragon, the multi-headed dragon with the sword. There's too many heads. Okay, I thought I had another thinking point, but I mustn't. So I just want to conclude then with a statement from Louise Morley, who was presenting at the British Council Women in Higher Education Leadership Initiative in 2013. She said, "We need diversity not just for moral purposes or social justice, but also for sustainability and the development of human capital. We cannot afford to ignore half a workforce." And I do hope that that promised land is now going to be more open than it has been in the past. We have lots of strategies that can continue to be used, and I think we have made some good progress, but I do think there's still a few challenges and a bit of a way to go down that road. And yep, that's it. Thank you very much.